Now, Africa boasts a population of 1.3 billion, but the continent has an annual new vehicle market of barely 1 million. The plan driven by South Africa is to grow this to between 3 and 5 million by 2035. This is said to give the scale required to justify African investment by multinational vehicle and components companies. David Furlonger, editor-at-large for Financial Mail, joins us to look into what it will take to accelerate efforts to develop a pan-African motor industry. Thank you so much for your time, David. Now, I haven't done a single interview with a car company MD or CEO without them talking about the Africa strategy. I mean, even VW in South Africa had a name change to reflect this. How far are we on that journey?
We're starting to see some movement now. I mean, you mentioned Volkswagen. They've been building cars in South Africa for some years. They've now announced plans to build cars in Egypt as well. And the theory is that Egypt will build different vehicles to here. And if we can get the trade deal right between the two countries, each would supply the other. Each of the plants would supply the other country. But if you look more generally, for the last few years, there's only been two countries really in Africa building vehicles in any great volumes. That's South Africa and Morocco. And Morocco supplies exclusively into Europe. So what we're looking for now, or what the industry is looking for, is to involve a whole load of other countries so that we can actually have a pan-African industry that everyone can feed into, and then they can actually have a new car market rather than the horrible used car dumped market that we have at the moment.
Sounds good. We love a pan-African vision. It also sounds like one that has lots of implementation risk and might take a while to really come online. David, I'm keen to find out what we might have to get going before we can start to really see a pan-African plan that is cohesive come together.
Well, to be fair, we're starting to see these things happening now. For example, Ghana is in the later stages of a vehicle manufacturing policy. That's expected to be announced soon. Kenya's on the way. Egypt is on the way. Algeria, which used to be a major manufacturer, its industry collapsed, but it's now getting a number of vehicle manufacturers want to invest there. Hyundai, for example, wants to start manufacturing vehicles there and is likely to supply South Africa from there. So we are genuinely seeing the start of movement. Nigeria, which is the biggest population on the continent, has been a disaster. Every time it comes up with a policy, it ignores it the next day. But what we're also seeing is a number of countries want to not just manufacture vehicles, but manufacture the components, provide the raw materials. And importantly, we're now seeing a move towards a pan-African supply of raw materials for electric vehicles that is not controlled by China. And that's an important step.
David, you spoke about the second-hand dumping in Africa. Talk to me about the tussle here between new vehicles and second-hand vehicles and what we need to do to get around that.
Okay, let me give you an example. Let me come back to Nigeria. Last year, they imported over 700,000 used vehicles for local consumers. Their new vehicle market was 10,000. Now, they've got a population 2 or 3 times that of South Africa, and we had nearly 600,000 new vehicles. Africa is simply a dumping ground. If you look at what we get from Europe, and this is a frightening statistic, which was given to me recently by Dave Coffey, who's head of the African Association of Automotive Manufacturers, the average age of a vehicle arriving in Africa from Europe is 17 years.
Wow.
They don't know what to do with them in the rest of the world, so they just dump them on Africa. And it's cheap and nasty. And of course, in Africa, not a lot of money, not a lot of professional vehicle finance, so people will buy what they can get. If we can clear out those used vehicles, there is then the scope to sell new vehicles.
That's a shocking statistic, David. I just want to hop onto it here. And I guess we, of course, know that a vehicle that is 17 years old is not often in the best of conditions here. I'm wondering, does this sector also thrive because of the lack of our, own African vehicle manufacturing there? And because, of course, that's the the only way that vehicles can be accessed? Is it, does the lack of a Pan-African automotive sector kind of fuel this dumping?
Oh, you're asking that classic question about the chicken and the egg.
Yeah.
Because South Africa is the only country with any sort of volume outside of Morocco, and like I said before, Morocco has no great interest in servicing Africa at the moment. So because there are so many used vehicles, there is no great demand for new vehicles. So over half of the new vehicles sold in Africa are sold in South Africa. So why would you buy a new vehicle if you can buy a dirt cheap new old vehicle, even though it's only going to last you 3 or 4 months? And if there's no vehicle finance, it's not going to help you either. So the theory is a number of countries have started banning older new vehicles. Older used vehicles. So, for example, 5 years, anything over 5 years, you can't sell in a number of countries now. And as we develop a Pan-African motor industry, that in itself will develop used vehicles, but decent used vehicles, which will come with a service history. So it's not going to be painless and it's not going to be quick, but over time, as has happened in the rest of the world, we will have cheaper new vehicles, which will turn in time into cheaper used vehicles.
David, you also spoke about Africa supplying raw materials for electric vehicles. In terms of that, I mean, how can the African automotive industry cement itself as an invaluable player in that space, and not just in terms of just providing the green metals for the EVs?
Yeah, well, if you look at the moment, we've got lithium, we've got cobalt. I mean, we've got everything in Africa.
Yeah.
But most of the main supplies are controlled by Chinese companies. They have bought the rights, they've bought the mines, they've built the mines. But all the raw materials that they take, they export to China raw, and then export it from China as the finished product. What we're looking at the moment, and the South African government is talking to American and European investors about perhaps financing brand new mines in Africa, but on the proviso that those raw minerals or those raw materials are processed here, and therefore we get the added value. We really don't need all these minerals going overseas, and then we pay 1,000 times more to get them back here in the first place.
And then before we let you go, let's talk about the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement and how it can give rise and maybe even acceleration to this Pan-African auto sector. We do know that this is actually a big part of the trade agreement.
Yeah, look, it's one of the pillars, one of the 4 pillars of the Free Trade Agreement. And the fact that this is happening now all comes down to the Free Trade Agreement. There's a lot of talking going on between COFIES and the Association of Automotive Manufacturers. Lots of discussions, lots of governments are interested. They figure that by the time they're finished, half of Africa's countries will be involved in one way or another in a Pan-African motor industry. One of the obstacles at the moment is discussing what they call rules of origin, which is another way of saying local content. They reckon that 40% should be reasonable. Some of the countries that want to get in but don't have much going for them at the moment are saying 30%. So there's discussions going on. These obstacles will be overcome, but it's going to take time. But the pleasing thing at the moment is we are starting to see real progress.
Brilliant.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time and for your insights there, David. Much appreciated. That was the editor-at-large for Financial Mail, David Furlonger.